Ok, excellent. Buongiorno a tutti, io sono Silvana Carotenuto che dirigo il Centro di Studi Postcoloniali e di Genere dell'Orientale, dell'Università di Napoli dell'Orientale, e ho solo tempo per un saluto e un ringraziamento a tutti. Diciamo, vorrei condividere la speranza che quest'anno sia un po' diciamo, si anticipi un po' migliore degli anni passati, e sono quindi molto molto contenta che il centro, questa è un'organizzazione che è stata a cura di True, della unit diretta un po' da Tiziana Terranova, ma sono contentissima perché questo è un lavoro che non solo, diciamo, ha proprio nella sua natura la collaborazione al di là dei confini, di cui vi parlerà Elena Abbiatici, che credo sia proprio la curatrice, l'inventitrice di questo di Eternal Body. Ma poi voglio dire, sono anche contentissima che questo corpo eterno possa essere rivendicato al di là di tutta la sofferenza che i corpi stanno soffrendo in questo periodo. Quindi questo non è parte di Borderscapes, nel caso eventuale ci fossero studenti, probabile che ci siano, anche se tutto un momento un po' così di confusione anche da parte dell'attenzione degli studenti, ma è un primo inizio di questo 2022 che io auguro, sottolineando la contentezza, la felicità di iniziare con una cosa così importante e così interessante, a tutti quelli che poi ci seguiranno sia nelle varie attività del centro, sia proprio nel seminario che normalmente verrà, diciamo, iniziato a marzo. So thank you everybody sincerely and warmly. I'm very, very happy to start the activities of the center, even if this is an event organized by Tiziana Terranova with the research unit in technology. And I only want to say that I do believe that this beautiful title, and also the subtitle, and also the big important material that you are going to show us, really make the point that it needs, even in a historical moment so complicated and so full of anxiety, we should really celebrate this eternal body against all drives that would like to destroy the eternity of these human senses. So thanks very much for you, the guests, being with us, and also for the people who I imagine globally will be listening and watching this very important event. So I'll pass the floor to Tiziana, who will briefly introduce, and then the presentation will really have its go. Thanks very much.
Hi to everybody, to all of those who are listening to us through the Facebook live stream. I'm not sure you can see me. I can still see Silvana on the screen.
No.
Oh no, you can see me. Okay, so maybe it's a different interface for different speakers. So my name is Tiziana Terranova. I'm a member of the Center for Postcolonial and Gender Studies that is hosting today's event in collaboration with Walkin Studios in Bangalore, whose director, Vivek Jokalingam, is also, I know, with us and might like maybe to say something as well later on. So we are very happy to present also as Technoculture Research Unit, the research unit I'm a member, co-founder of today's seminar, which takes the form of a laboratory, a workshop, through a series of talks detailing artistic practices around the question of odor or smell, under the title Odor as a Measure of Colonial and Environmental Toxicity, a focus on Southeast Asian communities. Today's webinar is part of the project The Eternal Body, the Human Senses as a Laboratory of Power between Ecological Crisis and Transhumanism, which is a project by Elena Abbiatici, who has approached us with a proposal to run today's seminar, a proposal that we very much welcomed, as it is in line with the research focus of both the center and the research unit. This project has been realized thanks to the support of the Italian Council, the Program for the International Promotion of Italian Art, and the General Directorate for Contemporary Creativity of the Ministry of Culture. And it has a number of project partners, such as Shake, FIM, Filosofia e Movimento, the Walkin Studios in Bangalore, Rehumanism, True, the CPG, Giudecca Art District, Venice, Arbeit London, and Shine in Rome. I would also like to thank for technical support and more Edoardo Biscossi, who is running the Zoom event, Stamattina Portanova, who will be chairing the question, and Annalisa Piccirillo, who also curated the communication of the event. Elena Giulia Abbiatici is an art historian and researcher who is been mainly concerned with the practice of curatorship and artistic practices. We are very happy to welcome Elena's in a project on smell, together as that of the guest Paul Vanouse, artist and professor from the University of Buffalo, Ishita Dey, artist and professor from the South Asian University, and Rohit Negi, professor at the Ambedkar University in Delhi. So it's a very, we're very honored to have you here, and we're really looking forward to hearing your research. The project Elena has proposed to us, and which today comprises your talks about different your artistic practices, is very interesting for us at the center. It brings together the question of the decolonization of the senses. As Elena says in her presentation of the project, there is a hierarchy of the senses where the gaze stays at the top, hearing maybe a little bit further down, and smell is considered as a minor, almost offensive cell. She reminded us in presenting her project that there is a colonial history of smell, the smell of slavery, as a recent volume by Andrew Kettler put it, but more generally, the whole question of the colonial suppression of the smell of the other. On the other hand, a project also links to question of political ecology, the legacy of industrial technologies in the global south, toxicity, and the pollution of large cities as an effect of the colonial relation. We also welcome very much the focus on artistic practices of of today's event, which is in line with the interest of the center. So I'm going to leave the floor now to Elena Abbiatici, and then to our much welcomed speakers. And we're going to take us, into this new direction of understanding the relationship between smell, odor, and colonialism, and the process of decolonization. So thank you very much.
So, well, thanks Tiziana, and thanks everybody from the Center for Postcolonial and Gender Studies for accepting this webinar. So I give you a small introduction of my project and my research. So my research titled Eternal Body, Human Senses as a Laboratory of Power Between Climate Crisis and Transhumanism, stemmed from the need to investigate the sensory traits that the contemporary environment implies. And the idea is also to investigate how the bioengineering in medicine is trying to respond to the sensory vulnerability of our body, along also a direction that aspire to the eternity of body. The perspective of this meeting instead wants to investigate how the concept from where I started, so the olfactory pollution is so wide and connoted with not only atmospherical perspective, but above all sociocultural meanings. And so is the idea to investigate how the concept of toxicity And we can say bad smell, unpleasant smell is linked to cultural facts and a colonial imprint. So the idea that the colonial practice is not only a political and economical fact, but an influence on the atmospheric that we breathe every day. Andrew Kettler, that is the Amazon Getty Fellow at the UCLA, in his book, The Smell of Slavery, published by the Cambridge University Press, outlines the role that smells play in the subjugation of African American slaves and also the objectivation they underwent in the affirmation of the biopolitical superiority of the colonizer. So we have a sensory imperialism where the condemnation of stank lives with the slave exploitation. And so we are gonna present different research by artists and also researcher Rohit Negi that try to investigate how the urban and colonial development shape so the reputation of bad smell and good smell, and this idea of an osmophobic vision of the world. To provide some example, Andrew Kettler informs in his book about a French traveler, a Native American ethnographer, architect and slave owner, Monsieur Antoine Simon Lepage Duprat, who after his travel in Louisiana, determined to place the Negro camp to the north of the colonel's house, as the wind that blows from the north are not so warm to make the Negroes produce a bad smell. Then there are many also English colonies in North America that argued that the offensive smell of the African-American slaves would help in the process of the silk cultivation because this Negro stench would be offensive to the silkworm. And also it became popular, the idea of a relationship between leprosy or other diseases, race and smell, as well as the idea of two different polygenesis, so two different human origins between the blackness and the whiteness. And also we can remember a different kind of indigenous olfactory tradition told by Professor Xuan L. Xu, author of The Smell of Risk, Environmental Disparities and Olfactory Aesthetics. Different indigenous olfactory tradition that have been completely uprooted and cancelled by this homophobic vision of the world. To mention some of them, there is the cosmology of the Onji people of the Andaman Island in the Bay of Bengal, whereby all living beings are thought as perfumes, and also the spiritual reverence of the Chamorro culture on the Guam Island on the Western Pacific, whereby the practice of smelling is the way to show reverence to the wise elder. Instead, the deodorant industry and the industrial olfactory landscape created like a sense of alienation, that derives from this distance created with the earth and with the air. It's something that was well described by the anthropologist Deborah Jackson as olfactory displacement. And it's something that I used to define non-olfactory places. So the idea of perfume created in the commercial mall or also in the gallery and the museum spaces that are so distant from the experience of human context and the air and earth landscape. There is also a well-known philosopher, Peter Sloterdijk, that in his book, Terror from the Air, wrote in 2009, speaks about the 20th century as a century in which physical wars are replaced by chemical wars. So the idea that the enemy is no more a body, but is the environment and the air itself. So this was a brief introduction of my research and on the topic of this webinar. And now we are going to present a different research, starting from Paul Vanouse's research, that we present two installation labor, and the labor is an installation made in 2019, where she tried to restore the role of microbes and bacteria in our immune system, in our emotional system also, and to imagine the odor of sweat as a nostalgic odor, as in the future, all activities will be computerized and we will have no more the idea of the human sweat. So I think that I can give the floor to Paul, and then I can continue with other presentation.
Okay. Thanks, Elena, and thanks so much for having me here. And I'm already intrigued and excited by what you've been talking about. I'll dive right in. In the talk, I'm going to describe two of my recent multi-sensory projects that focus on odor. And this work really sprang from contemporary findings on the human microbiome, the enormous populations of non-human residents on human bodies. And the reason I was so interested in this, in these findings, was because for years my work had used molecular biology techniques to challenge entrenched notions of racial and national identity and the cultural authority of DNA itself. My DNA work was always reacting against the idea that DNA fully denoted who we are and what we will be, our strengths and our weaknesses. And so just over a decade ago, human identity seemed to become increasingly complicated in a good way by research into the microbiome. The research found that bacterial cells in and around the body vastly outnumbered human cells, and that these microbes are responsible for many of our most important bodily functions, metabolism, etc. So in this context, then, the idea of what makes a person was again under the microscope for the culture at large. For centuries, we've been debating who gets to be considered a person and when, and that this was become sort of repoignant again, not just because of labor and liberation in the post-Renaissance world, but now in terms of a whole nother reason for having to redefine humans. To further dethrone any simple conception of self, most people think that the way they smell is part of their own condition, that your smell is your smell. But it turns out there is much more complex than that, and that a whole cocktail of microorganisms that live on and in us are the culprits of our scent. The smell of sweat is literally the smell of a few species of bacteria feeding on the excretions of our body to produce the familiar acrid and sour scents. So in this case, what the premise of this work was that the smell of exertion is not really a human scent unless we can redefine what we mean by human. And then on another front, I was thinking that the factory model itself has shifted so much from machine labor, from human to machine labor, and then increasingly in the 21st century to microbial manufacturing. And so today, non-human life produces a whole array of different products, of foodstuffs and enzymes and pharmaceuticals. And in some case, then the bacteria, the microbes themselves are the end products. And in another case, their respiration produces the end products for these factories. And so the term sweatshop was coined in England in reference to human factories and human factory workers themselves as sweaters, a model that they exported to colonial outposts and maintained throughout the world. Whereas labor, wherever labor could be efficiently exploited. In my plan, the sweatshop would also be inverted, to be a place where sweat was the product, not the means. And so my plan in this first work labor was to create a multi-sensory environment, and the scent would be not the superfluous byproduct of production as in the 18th century factory model, but more like this intentional product. I began the product by harvesting my own skin cells, capturing sweat in sterile pads, and then inoculating it onto petri dishes, specifically targeting the species that produce the scent of sweat. In this case, Staphylococcus corneae and Propioni bacteria. Each of these strains metabolize differently, and they produce different types of aroma. And typically the aroma are described by the type of sweat glands on the human body. Like eccrine glands produce a watery liquid used to cool our bodies, whereas acrine glands produce this much more like milky kind of thicker substance, which is associated with like fear and anxiety and also sexual arousal. They're more populated by Propioni and corneae bacterial strains. In his book, Black Lion, Red Wolf by Marlon James, his character Tracker, I think very aptly describes the twin scents thus. He says, Kava is like most men. He carries two smells. One when the scent runs down his back and dries, the sweat of hard work, and one that hides under the arms, between the legs, between the buttocks, what you smell when you're close enough to touch with lips. In this case, I harvested all the individual colonies before they could be incubated into the larger scale parts of the installation. So the installation then contained 3 bioreactors. This is labor. A bioreactor is like a specialized fermenting tank that's capable of providing more functions and sustaining in vitro life. And for me, this was really biopolitically important in the Foucauldian sense, because the control of living bodies would be throughout the process of reproduction, growth, decay, death, fully integrated into the industrial process. And each of the 3 bioreactors is incubating one of those 3 species of bacteria I described. And then finally, the scents from those bioreactors combine in the central chamber, in which this sweatshop icon, the white t-shirt, becomes infused with the scents as they're disseminated then through that vessel into the room. And I was thinking of this as like a post-anthropocentric scientific theater, in which audiences experience this microbial performance and a simultaneous notable absence, right? So in the center of the room, and at the absolute center of the installation, connected to radiating network of tubes and cables and things, is an empty white t-shirt hanging in a glass bell jar. So the idea is that while humans were at the center of our worldview, our ontology, in labor artwork, the human has conspicuously vanished. And like Boyle's bell jar at the center of an experimental proof of the existence of a vacuum in the 17th century, here I wanted the bell jar to be at the center of this new tentative worldview in which humans had vacated the center. Just cruising through this into the next piece. In March of 2020, though, days before we closed at the University of Buffalo, I became really hyper aware of the scent of students' breath. The act of speaking had taken on this sort of intensified olfactory and material dimension, as each utterance was loaded with semi-living molecular contents. And I looked, Julian Tang wrote in the New York Times, he said, if you can smell what someone had for lunch, you are inhaling what they're breathing out, including any virus on their breath. So this idea that our breaths are really molecular compounds, which include these complex mixtures of volatile and non-volatile molecules. In this sense, each of the molecules is like a semiomaterial and multi-dimensional signification, the presence of certain microbial configurations. And also they narrate varied biochemical process taking place in our bodies, in our gut cavities. So while labor was like an artificial armpit, the other project, this current project, is more akin to a series of mouths. And I was thinking about this not only in terms of this expanded definition of the utterance, but also like Mikhail Bakhtin's notion that utterance is not just formal signs and linguistic rules, but is this much more multidimensional. Likewise, Latour and Barad. I won't go deeply into that though. But I was also thinking in this new work about this idea of artifice. I was thinking that the performances would be orchestrated in this material network of mouths, artificial mouths. And the artificial mouth is also got an interesting history. It's an in vitro technology that's progressed from simple incubation apparatus at the end of the 19th century to these increasingly sophisticated and computer-controlled devices today. And breath is interesting. It's much more complex, I believe, than the epidermal microbes that I was dealing with before. There are literally like hundreds of different microenvironments between the tongue and the teeth and the palate and the throat and the gut. Saliva itself is a really fascinating substance. I've learned that at once it makes protecting, digesting, and makes speech possible. It turns out we produce about 720 milliliters of saliva a day, so that in our lives we produce a small swimming pool of saliva. The image that I have here, it's a sketch of one of the units from udder. I'm planning to have multiple units in the work though, in which scents are emitted from the vents, in which we come to expect an audible message and get something much more complex. And I'll conclude my thinking on this work with, you can see the bullet points on the slide, but I'll conclude with the way I've described the work in about 1.5 minutes. I said, the sense of human breath and body odors are generally abject, unwanted, and impolite. Much of Western culture, indeed, has been designed and constructed and marketed to minimize such odors. Deodorants, toothpaste, mouthwash, breath mints, laundry detergents, soaps, room deodorizers, not to mention bathrooms and even the modern toilet, have been equated with both civility as well as civilization itself. And McClintock describes European soap fetishism in particular as central to industrial modernity, inhabiting and mediating the uncertain threshold zones between domesticity and industry, metropolis and empire. Odor stories and myths of their effects have well served racism, colonialism, imperialism, and classicism, reinforcing stereotypes, enacting boundaries, and dehumanizing perceived others. Colonial policies reaffirm these odor stories and beliefs. So as Elaine was mentioning, in the Caribbean, in the 18th century, it was said that enslaved people must serve water from a cocoa nut shell ornamented with silver at the end of a hickory handle, so that their breath wouldn't contaminate its purity. And in other islands, the enslaved people would be made to live in huts on the western side of the plantation, so that slave owners wouldn't have to breathe their air. They could breathe only pure eastern air without being offended by the least nauseous smell. And of course, in the 19th century, diseases such as cholera were surmised to come from like slums and Chinatowns inhabited by impoverished and racialized others. And it's this indeterminate and miasmic materiality of odor that's made it such an effective tool for racist methodologies. And this is interesting because presently in the age of COVID-19, somewhat like in the age of miasma theory, we're continually reminded of and repulsed by the odor of our own breath, clinging to the pores of our mask, and others' oral odors have become a sort of additional source of anxiety. They signal proximity and possible transfer of viral materials. The sense of others can arouse fear as they transgress the very borders of self in a cloud of otherness. So the idea here of this final piece that I'll conclude with is the udder installation, is that by artificially recreating human sense in vitro, decorporealized and in excess, and offering them for aesthetic contemplation. The idea is to befoul these cultural prejudices through which both the faculty of smell as well as the quality of having a smell are denigrated. More importantly, I want to create a system for reimagining relations, a system that decontextualizes assent from its stigma, a network of apparatus that de-index the sign from the body. And like all my work, it's not really intended as an instantiation of an existing theory, but hopefully an instigator of new theories. So thank you.
So thanks so much, Paul. And it's very interesting, your presentation, in particular, your idea that you gave of an experience of a necessity of more corporeal experience of our also art installation, and in particular of the air we breathe. I want to share with everybody an image of another artist. I thought, thinking about Paul Vanouse and his work with the bacteria, that is Ishita Dey. I try to share my, pardon. So, yes, Ishita Dey is a Korean and American artist. She uses normally, as Paul, fragrances and fermented bacteria, so germinating bacteria in his installation, to create the idea of a real experience in the gallery space and in the museum. This is Lifestyle Wars, a part of Life is Cheap, a project that she presented at the Guggenheim in the occasion of the Hugo Boss Prize. Lifestyle Wars remind us to the tech industry and also to the odor of the tech industry environment, that we every day supposed to be odorless, but real are polluted of toxic compound in the mines of lithium and coltan and different other mines of mineral that we use every day with our technological furniture. Here we can see an electronic board circuit where different colony hands move. The hands allude clearly to these Asian labors and the child labor force. And the electronic circuit is, of course, a tech industry. This is part of, as I said, Life is Cheap, the installation at Guggenheim, that is composed also of force measure. Another installation with two dioramas. On one dioramas, there is a colony of ants exposed to a perfume called Immigrant Caucus. The perfume that Ishita Dey produced is an hybrid scent between an Asian American woman and an ant tissue. And on the other dioramas, there are different bacteria from Chinatown and Koreatown neighborhood in Manhattan. This is the idea, and the uses of ants alluded to idea to have an example in these insects that are guided by olfactory system, and also are an example of a more coexisted and unified society. Yeah, this is the last images of Immigrant Caucus. These are the bottle that spread the Immigrant Caucus. That also, maybe it's curious to say, Immigrant Caucus is titled in this way because the caucus is a meeting of a political party to deliberate a representative. Immigrant caucus is like a meeting of these imaginative ants to choose a representative that support the multicultural and the multi-species society. Then I presented a work by Peter de Coupere, another artist very important for my research. He is an olfactory artist, very involved on this media. The Smell of a Stranger is an installation he presented at the Biennale of Havana in 2015. He sent in, these are different structure where different fragrances were diffused. Peter with IFFF, a brand of fragrances, scent engineering 9 Cuban flower with the smell of sweat, the smell of blood, the smell of death, the smell also of American dollars. The idea is to reason about the openness of Cuba to the United States, to the commerce with the United States, and also to reason about the consequence of every political and diplomatic choices. Now we can move to India, and I have the honor to guest Rohit Negi.
Hi, thanks, Elena. I'll just share my...
Yeah, I can. Yeah, you can share your images. I can give a brief introduction about why I choose to focus on India, this topic. Yeah, you know, India is one of the most polluted country in the world. According to a recent study by a Swiss Global Pollution Monitoring Center, India is home to 35 of the 50 most polluted cities in the world. And this increases the need of new air purifiers, so new purifies domes, and the need of also smog eating towers. And this is a consequence of colonization and urbanization, because this kind of run of India and also China, for example, to reach the Western countries has induced this polluting context. And Rohit Negi is an assistant professor and director, of Center for Community Knowledge at Ambedkar University Delhi. He is the co-author with Prerna Sriyan of Atmosphere of Collaboration, Air Pollution Science, Politics, and Ecopreneurship in Delhi. So he also is a consultant of Ecological Collective, an artistic collective of a 3-year-long project, that's the Blue Sky Line, that wants to explore also the consequence of urban and colonial histories on the shaping of the hair. So Rohit, I give you the word, and Rohit would present also how is the public advocacy on media or not on this problem of toxic air, and how are the institutional and administrative structure relating with the problem.
So thanks. Thanks once again, Elena. I was just checking if my sound is working. Is it? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thanks so much once again. So you know, that was a fascinating intervention by Paul, and and I'm not an artist. I rather am sort of looking at how an urban political ecologist may look at this issue, which may, or which might be something that can inform some of the things that you're thinking about, or at least lead to some more conversation. So basically, my own brush with Delhi's toxic air, aside from being an unthinking breather of the same, was when I wrote my master's paper in the early 2000s on air pollution. There was then a whole groundswell of activism related to air pollution, which led to several interventions. I will come to those in a bit. The matter, however, seemed to die down after that for about a decade as air visibly improved as a result of some of these interventions, although they were also very contentious. But in 2014, the air's 2014-15, around that time, the air suddenly became an object of concern once more. And I just, after completing all my studies, I happened to be back in Delhi. And so it made sense to sort of turn to it once again and see how things have changed over 15 years. So what happened then was that first, the WHO listed Delhi as the world's most polluted capital city. So we had leapfrog Beijing by then. Second, US President Barack Obama visited Delhi in January of 2015, which led to Washington Post noting that he would lose 6 hours of his life because he was going to spend 3 days in Delhi. Then also around the same time, a New York Times correspondent who was posted in Delhi basically left the city and the country, in fact, saying it was because of the bad air in Delhi. So once more, the air was everywhere, and it has not let up since then. This is an image of, Amul, if you know, India is one of, is the most popular sort of dairy brand. They have the milk and butter and all the rest of that. But they also have this weekly or bi-weekly cartoon that is put out publicly in the newspapers where this little girl sort of is commenting by being part of some of these current affairs, comments on what's going on. And this is from this past winter where she sort of is alarmed by the pollution. And so such images reach the public, such images or such ideas about it being an airpocalypse, as one report called it, or an atmosphere, as this cartoon calls it. These are images that are everywhere. And indeed, it is a major problem. So in this graph, this is from our book, the one with the black line at the back in the background. This is basically the monthly average of PM 2.5, the particulate matter 2.5 in Delhi. And you can see there is a seasonality to it. So obviously in the winter months, so I'll just, if it's tough to read, I can just tell you that in the winter month, it really spikes. So the spikes you see are basically, they go from October until January, February. There are meteorological reasons for it. There are weather related reasons for it. The air, suffices to know, is that A, there is a seasonality, and B, we only have air that is that corresponds to national standards for about 30 to 40 days a year. And that air, then the good air, is basically restricted to the monsoon months when it rains. And the other graph here you can see on the blue is basically the Google trend search for Delhi air pollution. And you can see that interest in the air, popular interest in the air, also sort of follows the materiality, the seasonality of pollution itself, which actually in our interviews with scientists, this was one of the things they would always bemoan, that people only seem to get interested when it's visible. So so what I'll do in the rest of it with this background is to just comment on 3 aspects of the air issue. There are many, and we can sort of spend the whole night talking about it. But one is a little bit on the sources of pollution and the complexities in knowing those sources. And despite the best scientists working on it, there is still several gaps in what we know. Second is what Elena pointed to, which is the sort of public and political salience of air pollution. And third is what in our work we have identified as certain blind spots. certain gaps in the way we understand it, and just a little bit of time on what we can do about them. So if you look at the sources of pollution, this is a chart from a newspaper article published by two very important voices in the debate. One is a sort of environmental policy practitioner, the other is a scientist, atmospheric scientist, but together they published this. And this is nothing but a compilation of different studies on Delhi's air and the sources they see as contributing to the pollution. So you can see that there isn't consensus, that depending on the methodology, depending on the apparatus, the measuring instruments, and the style or the kind of methodology that is used, there are different apportionment, there are different causalities that are ascribed. So for instance, the studies vary widely in their attribution of the pollution to dust, for instance, and dust is important because we are Delhi, or this northern Indian region, actually, we have the desert to the one side and the mountains, the Himalaya, to the other. So we sort of are trapped between those two. And especially in the summers, we get a lot of dust. Then there are also wide divergences in the third point here, which is basically biomass burning for heat. So basically in the winters, homes are not centrally heated. Therefore, you will see Ishita later, she's wearing like really multiple layers of jackets, is because it's really cold in Delhi right now and we don't have central heating. And so we still have other ways in our homes to keep heated, but people who do not have those means, who cannot pay for the electricity, or who are working outside in the evening or nighttime, they must keep warm by setting fire to wood or some other means, right? So, but that also contributes to pollution. So this is very much a contextual sort of a situation, the bottom half, and the other two are widely known. They are seen the world over, industry and transport. And there are new methodologies to understand these things. So for instance, there are increasing research that takes satellite imagery, such as these, to account for pollution. And they tell us that, in fact, it's not about Delhi. The entire region, which includes parts of Pakistan, several states of India, all the way even to Kathmandu and Nepal, they are engulfed by this massive smog for several months of a year. But what we found is that what's happened, however, in all of this knowledge is that advanced instrumentation has become the benchmark for truth claims and certainly publications, which means that you need well-equipped labs to be able to speak about air's constituents, and only very few exist in India. And in India, they still do exist, but think of East Africa, Central Africa, many other parts of the world where they are struggling with air pollution, but without the kinds of expertise to know about it. Second, there is the related idea that what is being found and published is new knowledge, right? So increasing sophistication in instrumentation, and what is published is supposedly new. But then when we did an analysis of 100 scientific papers on Delhi's air published since the early 1950s, we found that a lot is known, a lot has been known for a long time, that there are, of course, new variables that have come into play, but the consistencies and sources are there. Since the 60s, studies talk about dust, about industry, increasingly from the 70s onwards about vehicles. They also do a lot of analysis on multi-sectoral links, that is the links between these, the intersections of these. And so there is these rich knowledges that exist, but they are not at all represented or cited or even talked about in all the new research that is being done in Delhi. So it is important, therefore, to historicize, to understand what has gone before, and also to acknowledge the work of scientists, especially those based in South Asia themselves, in knowing air as it is. Now, moving on, the second point, which was about how air has been brought into the public discourse. So this is an advert that was published in many of Delhi's newspapers in 1998, prior to the city's elections back then. This was published by a leading environmental NGO, Center for Science and Environment, which basically tried to increase the political visibility of air pollution. So basically, they sent out their manifesto to candidates of different parties that were contesting elections, and they asked them to sign on it to make pledges for clean air. Subsequently, there have been widespread campaigns like with school children to help to stop burn firecrackers on the festival of Deepavali. But a lot of the action in the late 90s and early 2000s around that time took place not in the public domain, but in courtrooms. So the Supreme Court of India actually ordered several actions which were then implemented. These included the conversion of public and paratransit to natural gas, the relocation of hazardous industries and many other factories outside of Delhi's peripheries, which some people have called this sort of peripheralization of urban detritus in a sense. And also new emission inventories that were modeled on the Euro standards. So in other words, you add to this push towards the expensive subway metro systems in Delhi and other places, and you have this entire infrastructuring of the city for clean air. And here on the right, you can see one of these stations, the gas stations, where a lot of the auto rickshaws and vehicles now get their gas from. And on the left is this rendering of the peripheral industrial landscape. It doesn't look like that at all, let me tell you that. Fast forward to 2020, and now political parties themselves vie or have made pollution one of the main aspects of their campaigns. This is in Hindi, so I'll tell you what this is about. This is this gentleman in this image is the Chief Minister of Delhi, and this brochure was actually published before the previous elections, during the campaign in 2020, and they basically said we have 10 guarantees for Delhi, 10 promises for Delhi, really. And the sixth one here is about pollution-free Delhi, making Delhi pollution-free. And the concrete promise here is to reduce pollution by at least 3 times. So clearly from the early days of CSC's advertisement that I put up earlier to this guarantee, air has traveled a long distance in the political landscape of the city. There is ongoing international attention, local shame. Several scientists and medical practitioners are very outspoken and they contribute to the public debate. And there are new publics as well, such as social media groups. The most active one on Facebook has over 11,000 members, and they are very active. They also organize protests and actions on the ground. There is the quote unquote warrior moms, which is, according to themselves, a collective of mothers fighting for our children's right to breathe clean air. Then there are data scientists and open data advocates who have also moved to the environmental space, who scrape data from government online sources, which are very often not very user-friendly, and they make those data public, and they often create visualizations to help understand the dangers of pollution. Then there are these entrepreneurs, ecopreneurs, as we are calling them, who provide quote unquote solutions that one can purchase, like handheld monitors to know your intimate air, in your room, in your bedroom, in your offices, air purifiers to then clean that air once you know about how polluted it is. And there are also a group of members of the Indian Parliament who act like a caucus. You mentioned caucus earlier. They are sort of trying to create a caucus around which members of parliament from different parties, different backgrounds come together to debate and deliberate and act on air pollution. So there is much movement. However, the public institutions also have to balance anti-pollution interventions against particularly the economic costs given the compulsion of capital and quote unquote development, which is why there is always a gap between knowledge of pollution, the strength in advocacy, but action is much more limited. This gap causes frustration amongst many of the pollution's publics, which gets its release sometimes in calls to make pollution enforcement mechanisms in India along the lines of China or Singapore. In other words, authoritarian. There is a good, this is then a good segue into the final part of what I have to share, the blind spots. So there are 3 here. The first is that there is a largely apolitical understanding of air pollution. It is seen by many as a technical problem to be solved through technical fixes. So the smog towers are one such example. enough said about them. Also, the questions of class and justice are less important, although they are being debated now much more than they were previously. And also the larger change in the Indian polity towards centralization and authoritarianism is something seen as separate from the environment, right? Even as the state uses environmental governance for political ends. So for instance, last year, at some point, the Supreme Court basically appointed a former judge, a retired judge, as a one-person committee to look at the problem of stubble burning, that is, farmers who set fire to harvested crops. But the government didn't trust the person because he's independent-minded and critical. And so within days, the government went ahead and actually rammed through an ordinance bypassing the parliament to create a whole air pollution commission, which rendered basically this one-person committee moot. And this commission essentially is a centralization exercise. So creating even more authoritarian sorts of structures using the environment. The second issue is the issue of scale. So we are constantly moving, as I showed in the NASA image earlier, also to regional, even transnational aspects of air pollution, but we often therefore miss the scales at which it is lived. That is the neighborhood scale where people breathe, which is important given that pollution hotspots exist. And this is an exception. WRI used disaggregated data to basically point out how there are certain parts of even Delhi. Delhi is polluted as it is, but even within that, there are certain hotspots. People are breathing different air, essentially. Last year or a year and a half ago, there was a wonderful feature in the New York Times also, who basically tracked two kids who went about their daily lives and looked at each moment that they were, what kind of air they were breathing, and there was a wide divergence between the two. Finally, if we consider the environmental health pathway, which is something like this. So in science, basically they go from source to emission to concentration that is in the air, and then how much we are breathing in and what it is doing to our bodies. So this environmental health pathway is supposed to be linear and smooth. But what's happened is that there has been overarching emphasis on the top half of this. This has become into two halves. And there is overarching emphasis in science on the top half, which is the science of monitoring. So knowing how much concentration there is, knowing which pollutants there are. There is far less work on the effect or impacts on the bodies, on different bodies in different places. And it is not accidental. One can do monitoring or modeling exercises from far. This is like, there are lots of papers on Delhi published where the scientists, the people who wrote the papers have never even been to India. And they can do that because it's a distance view of pollution. You can simply analyze data sets and satellite imagery and say something about it. But the latter, this bottom half, requires painstaking work, often taking 10, 15, 20, 30 years even. And this is more akin to slow research. So in our book also, we ended with this call to consider pollution not so much as an episodic phenomena, but as a slow disaster, which opens the space for different knowledges, doing the work of translation and building collaborations, and for ethical responses that might be incremental, but can be progressive. So I'll end with Max Liboiron and et al. Who write of this form of politics that, and I quote, slow activism does not have to be immediately affective or effective, premised on an anticipated result. It can just be good. Right, so I'll end with that and just share a couple of resources if you're interested. One is our own sort of book. The other is a wonderful historical overview of air pollution. It's not focused on Delhi particularly, but more on Mumbai, Bombay, and Calcutta, and looking at colonial forms of air and different aspects of it. So I'll stop there. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks, Rohit Negi. I think that you can well describe. Can you see me? You have so well described the complexity of what I call the olfactory pollution. And we can introduce now Ishita Dey. Ishita Dey is an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology at the Faculty of Social Science at the Asian University. Hi, Ishita, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ishita Dey is also an artist, and now she would propose her project, Erasing Smells, Sensorial Politics and Intimate Sense Labor, a group discussion with cab drivers and interviews with domestic workers to explore the notion of bad air and bad smells and how they are culturally coded. Because this olfactory pollution and the complexity also of this term is part of a context where there are polluted nanoparticles, then the aseptic museum and aseptic spaces, and then the removal of that kind of odor that are considered bad for the high society. And it's curious to remember that the invention of the sanitary convenience seems to have destroyed people's sense of equality. Somerset Maugham, an English writer and playwright, recounting an encounter between a high-ranking Chinese general and one of the most oppressive of slaves, said that sanitary convenience seems to be responsible for class hatred much more than the monopoly of capital in the hands of the few. It's a tragic thought that the first man who pulled the plug of a VC with that negligent gesture rang the knell of democracy. Ishita would speak about her project with domestic laborers and cab drivers, and about what they perceive as smell of happiness, smell of fear, and smell of disgust connected to their domestic activities. So welcome, Ishita.
Yes.
I think that.
Can you hear me?
Yes. So well.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome.
So thank you, Elena, and it's a wonderful to share when your project is also kind of at the initial stage, because some of the field work that I was doing was during the pandemic, just before the lockdown, and those interviews so it's based on certain preliminary research. Let me first tell you how I got interested into smells. My interest in smells actually came from a field diary. By training, the methodological vantage point from which I work on smells is ethnography of smells. So it all started with a field diary that I carried from my field work in a sweet shop in Bangalore, and the smell would not leave that field diary. Of course, it was the stench of milk, the stench of air, sweat, whatever you call it. And the discomfort of having that smell, yet while I was writing about the laboring bodies, that are working in the sweet shops, made me also curious about that what it is about the cultural codes of smell that we kind of carry forth and that we erase, and that also become subjects of study. Dr. Rohit Negi, my former colleague at Ambedkar University Delhi, I used to teach there before I moved to South Asian University, has beautifully, given us a background of the socio-political landscape of the air pollution and what has been the research. What I am trying to do through my project is to return to the domestic. And to return to the domestic and make sense of, one of the interesting cartoons that he showed around that Amul girl, the fear aspect. Is there a fear with which people live, right? This also came about from the project that I'm presenting today around erasing smells. I kind of got initiated into this project as part of a collaborative art project that Dr. Mohammed Said and I did with Kiran Nadar. It was a commissioned art project on smells of the city, stench, stink, and the fragrance of the city. As part of that city, when I started working with the Domestic Workers Union, and my relationship with the Domestic Workers Union comes from a personal research on migrant workers. When I started working with them and engaging with the smells, there's one thing that the domestic workers kept on pointing out, that we not only, our work involves, and this is the coinage that the title of the presentation actually comes from. The erasing smells comes from their articulation of how they deal with smells. That we are the ones who erase smells as well as we produce smells. So as far as the scholarship on domestic atmosphere is concerned, we can of course think of Alain Corbin's fantastic work on the domestic atmospheres, which attracted a lot of attention from hygienists, and it talked about separating smells and odors of kitchens and bathrooms from living areas, and it has been at the heart, and this separation of smells within the domestic spheres has been at the heart of many discussions, and the context of India is not so different, right? But at the same time, what is integral and what is important to be remembered here is that there is a section of workers who today we are calling the domestic workers, who come from a certain caste, class, background, and predominantly they happen to be women who also are part of this large force of domestic workers, and they end up working in intimate spaces. And this is where I turn to, and scholars working on gender studies will be familiar with the phenomenal work of Ellen Boris and Rachel Perena's work of intimate labor. Domestic work, as I've argued in a recently published article in the Census and Society, that it is an extension of intimate labor. And intimacy, as Ellen Boris and Rachel Perenas argue, is one of the defining features of capitalism. And by bringing together intimate and labor, they not only help us blur the boundary between home and work and labor, but also productive and unproductive labor. And they also give me and they define intimate labor as the work of Boris and Perenas defines the intimate labor as the work of forging, sustaining, nurturing, maintaining, managing interpersonal ties, as well as the work of tending to the sexual, bodily, health, hygiene, care of individuals. One of the defining features of the intimate nature of domestic work that is relevant for our discussion today is the mixing of smells that are intimate, private, and transgress the boundaries of caste, class, and religion, and how it gets invisibilized in the discussions of skills related to the domestic worker. At the heart of domestic work, as I mentioned at the very outset, is everyday erasure of smells of intimate corners and spaces of a domestic space that is already separated by caste, class, religion, gender. A part-time or a full-time domestic worker has to not only interiorize senses intimate and specific to a household, but they also have to normalize. This everyday normalization is also based on the social perceptions of work and work-related smells. And it is here I propose the term intimate sense labor to understand the role of senses in the everyday work lives of the intimate labor. Intimate sense labor, according to me, involves sensing as a skill, So the nose becomes a very, very active participant of this labor, right? So as we all know, of course, Marx did tell us the history of labor could be the history of 5 senses, but somehow, as far as the discussion on sensing and labor is concerned, there is a huge discussion in the food science, food tasting, etc. But in other discussion of labor and senses often get reduced to a descriptive category. Can we make senses return to a sort of an analytic category, particularly in understanding of intimate space? And this is why I'm proposing the concept of intimate sense labor. As far as intimate sense labor is concerned, I kind of go on to show that the idea of intimate sense labor particularly can be looked at from the perspective of the domestic workers, not only in the way in which they normalize, but also how it involves sensing as a practice inherent to any acts of bodily work in intimate labor, be it through touch, smell, sight, or listening. This concept could have our parallels with Vanini, Vaskul, and Gottsche's notion of somatic work. Now, domestic workers encounter intimate bodily smells during their acts of erasure of smells. In my conversations with the domestic workers, particularly associated with the Domestic Workers Union in Delhi, based out of a resettlement and rehabilitation colony, most of them struggled to name smells. Instead, two words emerge to describe their experience of smell. One is fragrant experience, for khushbu, the Hindi word to refer to the fragrant experience. Second, badbu, or unpleasant smells. Rather than reducing khushbu or badbu to the binaries of good and bad smells, I think it is important to understand how these notions are expressed through three emotions, that of fear, happiness, and disgust. I will take you through. One of the sort of narratives. That the cab drivers that I'm interviewing primarily are managed by, again, a women-led NGO, and the Sakha cab, whom I'm referring to as the Sakha cab drivers, they are primarily women. Let me take you through this ethnographic vignette of one of the interviews that I'm having with the Sakha cab driver, and then I will return to the three emotions of fear, happiness, and smell. Fear, happiness, and disgust. The Sakha cab driver tells me, and this is about the seasonality of smells that get trapped in their cars. I can tell from the smell that the client is from a certain place. I don't know what perfumes they use. It is a certain peculiar smell. At times, we have to roll down the windows as we are not used to such perfumes. You have to let go of good smells. And for instance, bad breath, smelly burp, of course, socks, but we can't tell that their bodies smell. However, our bodies smell, and often we receive comments about them as well. During the summer, there is a peculiar smell in the cars. No one can escape sweat anymore. Slowly, Delhi is also becoming humid. There is no escape from a smell of sweat and a mixed smell of sweat and other bodily fluids. When people sweat and apply deodorant, it leaves a certain peculiar smell. It is not only true for clients, but also for us. Another smell that we come across while driving across the city is particularly the fragrance of flowers when we cross the neighborhood markets. Come November, we have to deal with smog. It becomes difficult to drive, breathe, the smell becomes unbearable. There is a smell of woolen clothes, sweat, and deodorant. While we have to adjust to smells of our clients, we are constantly reminded to take care of smells. Our employers discourage us from eating tiffins inside the car. We eat outside so that the car doesn't smell of our tiffin. Just imagine when our clients eat smelly food. Even pickle can leave a strong smell after even pickles can leave a strong smell inside the car. What are the smells, how do we really understand? And it is here that I ask this question, that when we think about these categories of fear, disgust, and happiness, how do we really understand this in the context of the intimate sense labor that I'm proposing? One of the ways in which smells of happiness is spoken about are the eraser objects that they use, which are mostly antiseptic, and the sanitizers, which are also florally scented, to talk about fresh air. So the car smells fresh when I use a certain floral smell. The house smells fresh when I use Lysol. A little bit of digging up around the smell objects of cleaning, also directed me to one of the leading chemical industries that has been at the heart of the erasure of smells, particularly if we really look at in the domestic, particularly within the domestic framework. It is one of the companies that have gotten associated almost as if it is the liquid itself, is Dettol. Dettol, as we all know, Dettol is a sort of an antiseptic liquid that was, introduced particularly, I think, in the context of, the early medical care, and now it gets introduced as a cleaning agent, right? Now, when we think about the ways in which this sort of, the fluids, and this is where, let's put it this way, the conversations were happening and the lockdown happened, that how do we really make sense of the smell objects, I'm calling it the smell objects right now, in connection to intimate sense labor? I propose three sort of questions to consider for this audience. Does this, the way in which, is there a way in which, we need to understand the history of particularly the smell object of Dettol, and the proliferation of, because Dettol has also introduced post-pandemic various sort of surface sanitizers, right? And the way, and also a corresponding product, Lysol, which is particularly used as a floor cleaner, and it has almost become the synonym of, Xerox and photocopy, right? So the brands have become synonymous of, cleaning itself, both Dettol and Lysol in the domestic sphere. How do we really understand the registers of this sort of a branding of the everyday domestic smells as clean? So I smell Dettol. So often I would get this interviews, this responses, I smell Dettol, I smell Lysol, and therefore the air is clean. Similarly, in the corresponding side, when it came to the cab drivers, the first smell, because most of these cab drivers, it is important to understand the arrangement of, the relationship with, of the cab drivers and the cab owners. This is a sort of a cab service that is managed by a sort of an NGO which has this private wing called Sakha Consulting Wings. And it is one of probably the first cab service which also has women drivers running across 3 cities, managed in 3 cities, Delhi, Jaipur, and Calcutta. And I have done interviews with few women, of the Sakha cab drivers, particularly based out of Delhi. Based on the interviews that I've had so far, they talk about the car, again, the perfume, the way in which the odor industry has defined that this is meant for the car to smell nice, that becomes the good air, whereas bodily smells and culturally coded bodily smells get reduced to bad air. By extending the concept of intimate sense labor, can we understand the way in which particularly the Sakha cab drivers are trying to make sense of the intimate space where they are kind of separating the good air and the bad air on the basis not only of their cultural notions, but also of the odor industry? right? And how do we really understand the role of the odor industry in reshaping the intimate relations that these cab drivers come to embrace, not only in their everyday work lives, but also in their personal lives. The second part of the personal lives remains to be researched, that whether the notions, because within the domestic workers, let's put it this way, they might not have seen a lavender, but they feel a lavender powder smells beautiful, right? And this also comes from their interaction with the workspace. And this is these ethnographic details are there in the paper that has been recently published. So I'm not going into the details. So this, I do not know the real smell object, right? I do not know the real smell object, yet I have smelled it through a certain object, through a certain, cosmetic product or a cleaning product. So domestic workers also would tell about how the house could also smell of lavender. But lavender is a flower that, is alien, at least in Delhi. With this preliminary, observations around the cultural notions that how do culturally coded smells shape the intimate sphere, I will I will end with two observations and two questions. One, how do we really understand, the way in which domestic health and hygiene industry, domestic health and hygiene have been translated in the odor industry to clean domestic spaces and also cars? How do the senses in general and smell in particular, if there has been an invisibilization in the discussion about intimate labor, how do we really make, what lies at the heart of this erasing of smells is also the notions of cleanliness that have been guided by the smell objects. Notion of cleanliness are often guided by the smell objects, and notions of cleanliness, and this is something that I need to really gather more interviews to say it. I think notions of cleanliness are also one of the ways to look at the way in which, the practice of smelling, let me put it this way, the practice of smelling has been an integral part of civilizing process, not only in the colonial times, but also in the post-colonial times. And I'll stop here.
So thanks, Ishita, for your wonderful presentation and continue your concept. I briefly introduce the work of Lauryn Mannigel. Lauryn Mannigel, unfortunately, is not with us due to health reason, but she's an artist and researcher and curator based in now in Arizona that had a workshop in Bangalore in 2019 titled I Smell a Rat, which offer a critical discussion about the social perception of female body scents. Unfortunately, reconfirm the stigmatization and taboos about female body scents. I can share some images. So this is some image part of her workshop. Briefly, I can say that Lauryn Mannigel investigate the political and aesthetic potential of the way people smell, in particular how the women smell. She currently focuses on the affective cognition perception of female body scents, understanding the body sense as a three-dimensional approach pertaining to cultural practice, biology, and atmosphere. Overall, Mannigel's current work aspires to contribute to transcending the Western hierarchies of the senses, inviting participants to be led by their nose, and forming the basis for an embodied aesthetic of smell. Well, now we have just finished the presentation of our guest, and if someone have some question, or if we can have a discussion, we can share some thoughts.
Yes, maybe I'll start by thanking Elena for bringing us to pay attention to smell, actually, and all your guests who have enriched our understanding of this, the implications of this kind of history and artistic and genealogical approach to the senses, and specifically to smell. I was just thinking about how COVID-19, one of the hallmarks is that it takes away the sense of smell, and that it usually is removed in the description because there's much focus on taste. But the loss of taste apparently is a consequence of the loss of smell. So this is the most intimate, the way, you know, it came across in all this presentation is that it really feels like one of the most intimate of the senses together with taste, I think, and it's usually very closely connected to that. And especially through Paul's presentation, what I got out of it was that, you know, maybe smell represents so much our relationship with the other, or, you know, it kind of embodies it at such a visceral level because it's non-human to start with. Even all the smells that you mentioned, they added the work on microbes, the human body, as Paul showed. So it's the microbial element, which is very much unlike the clean imagery of DNA as a coat. So you have this visceral production of molecules that escape the boundaries between bodies, and they're literally invasive in the way they operate. And on the other hand, smell is about minerals. As in the industrial labor or the odor industry, it's all about reworking of the mining industry and transformation of minerals through thermodynamic machines, so heat engines, and the kind of the smell and the odor and the pollution that is derived from it. So also very much the association of smells with labor. So it's a sweating body of the plantation, of the industrial factory, as opposed to this kind of odorless, apparently odorless world of the digital. So if I think about Zuckerberg's metaverse, right? So it's this new augmented reality, virtual reality world, which again is dominated by sight in the first place, and then it's gonna be like Zoom, right? They're gonna be, it's this kind of very sensorily deprived world where smell and taste in particular are completely erased. So there seems to be very much also the hallmark of the future. So yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to say to thank you again for this wonderful research, both artistic and sociological and political ecology, which is a perspective that we value very much. And I would like also to leave the floor to others who might like to ask questions or make short interventions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tiziana. Maybe we can collect a few questions and then ask the speakers to respond to them if there are any other comments or questions. I don't know. People can raise their hands here on Zoom, or they can also just interview. Yeah, also Silvana wanted to say something, and Paul. Silvana, we can't hear you.
Yeah, it's not even a question of questions. It's mainly to thank you all, because I was listening, especially with the how can I say, to the construction of the project itself, very beautifully done. And I'm also happy that the Italian whatever was able to understand the beauty and the importance of a project like this. But I was really appreciating the possibilities, the paths the project can follow, and very well done. Thank you. Then because it was so interesting and so directed somehow, I was being addressed by some resonances with, you know, for example, a project like this immediately overcomes the logic of the confrontation between West and East, going directly to a different kind of wisdom. So, but personally, I was reminded, maybe it's a curiosity, I was reminded of one of the texts that, to me, in terms of deconstruction, in terms of philosophy, in terms of feminism, Irigaray with the strong critique of God, what's his name? Heidegger, with the forgetting of air. And I was really waiting for the women to appear on the scene, because in a way, even the way that the book was presented, it's a very old book. It is crucial for appreciating Irigaray's overall project of resuscitating the feminine body by resuscitating the elements earth, air, fire, and water from their masculine appropriations, which in a way, I imagine that it should also, could also be informing the project in its development. And then I was also, I'm reading, I'm sorry that this is in Italian, I should be reading it in English, but I'm so against Amazon at the moment that somehow I prefer to buy the books translated into Italian and not getting the original. But the Nobel Prize Gournat, in this quite exceptional novel, which is By the Sea, has I have been, since I started the novel, reading the novel, I have been working, trying to look for an incense, which is called it's at the very beginning of the story. It's this guy who comes from Zanzibar and moves to England. He has been advised to pretend that he doesn't speak English. So he's totally exposed to the checking at the airport, the people, and this British guy who is not British, whatever, searches in his little bag and finds this incense, this little box, which is oud. It's a Syrian kind of fragrance. And the guy the guy at the airport does not believe that the whole past, future, and present of this migrant is inscribed in this little box, which seems to be empty, only the smell. And the smell comes back as a kind of center of the being in movement. The only thing that the guy keeps with him is this little gift the Persian businessman gave him long before. And that, so it's also, it's problematic in terms of, it can be really under attack, but it can also be with this logic of the intimate, can also be the most essential essence of the person. And again, I was reminded that some weeks ago, I heard an interview with some scientists working in France, a woman leading the group. I can't remember exactly the university, but this woman was announcing that instead of the vaccine, in 2 years, they will produce a kind of spray that you will use to stop your nose from receiving and allowing and giving. So I was imagining, could you, just in order to open the discussion, imagine a kind of future of a transhuman species without the ability to smell? Is it possible that, especially the importance of your project, incunates in a moment in which the nose as the membrane between the internal and the external is under attack, as the way in which we should be living in the future, without that ability to get inside and also let essence come out.
Yeah, I can welcome your suggestion because and give also the idea that I had from the starting of this project, that was really the idea to put in the center the sense of smell, because of this kind of reality where this kind of sense is rejected, cancelled, not only for the COVID-19, but also because we are not used to use the sense of smell, because we live in a civilized society, so we use the sense of smell only in a pleasure way, most of all. Instead, the idea is to remark and underlines the importance of this sense, and also to remark the tangibility of our air and our atmosphere, because it's the first experience that we have of reality, and it's something that every day, every second we breathe. And in particular, I'm interested in because of this kind of cancellation of any kind of discussion about this sense, except in fragrances world. For example, in the olfactory marketing, we enter in commercial mode, for example, and we breathe so fascinating perfumes, but it's only linked and connected to the industry perfumes, the discussion about smell. And this is also an invitation to think about the sense of smell in our toxic reality, and to problematize the complexity of our olfactory landscape, that are most of all tailor-made artificial landscape because of car emission, fabric emission, rubbish, industrial waste, and so on. And we forget about the possibility, you know, to exercise also our sense of smell. For example, we are used to exercise our sense of sight, our sense of hearing. We have the musical notes, we have the primer, secondary color, but we don't know anymore, and we don't know at all, we can say, what are the primary notes of the industry of perfume and of human smells. So to put in the center again what we are rejecting and eroded the sense of blood, the sense of sweat, every kind of body sense. And in particular, and I'm sorry that Lauryn Mannigel is not with us, but she's focusing on the female body sense. So in the Asian culture, so in India. And the stigmas, the social stigmas and the influence are still on, unfortunately, there, because this is what her workshop reconfirmed. But yeah, this is, I think that this is a starting step of a project that maybe I can go on and I can continue to explore better how we can be guided again as the hands of Anika E. Our nose, and to represent this sense that is completely cancelled by the imperialism, most of all. We are, it's a cultural impact and a colonial imprint.
I think Paul also wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I was I guess had a few it's nice to hear hear about everybody's work. And I was just taking a few notes about sort of interesting ideas that I wanted to hear more about. And what I guess the two concepts, I guess, basically, I think from both Elena and also from I'm forgetting your first name, Mrs. Dey.
Ishita.
Ishita, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, your name's like mine. It doesn't come up in the window. Your first name. But both then your idea of the smell object, and also Elena's noting of this concept of olfactory displacement. There was two ideas I'd just like to hear you kind of jam on a little more, if you could.
Yeah, please, Ishita.
Yeah, as far as the smell objects, the idea also came about particularly with the way in which whenever, let me put it this, I'm still thinking through the idea. So let me just put forth what I was trying to think of. Whenever people were talking about, whenever my respondents, and in this case, of course, in both the domestic workers, the female domestic workers and the female cab drivers, when they were talking about smells, they were always referring to an object that was emanating a smell rather than the descriptor, and that became the descriptor of the smell. So, for instance, Dettol is an antiseptic liquid that is used to, when you have a cut, bruise, it's found in the medical store. But the smell of the Dettol or the smell of phenyl, of course, there's a symbolic association, but for them, it's a very sort of a material association with which they are articulating eraser of smells, that you apply Dettol and, you clean it. So I'm still, you've got me right, and I'm still working with, how to think of a smell object, because just tangentially speaking, just a little detour from when we were working on the art project, we also had a perfumer in Lucknow who had created this perfume, not as part of the project, it's found in his shop, named after a very, very famous, named after the Awadh of Lucknow. Now, how do you personify a person in a perfume bottle, right? And this is named after the Nawab of Lucknow, Wazid Ali Shah. He created a perfume in honor of him, and the notes that he used to describe, and he kind of showed us that smell object, I'm calling it the smell object, that smell object when we were discussing politics of work and smell. He said, but will I want to create a smell? And that's a conversation we were trying to set up with him, that what would be the smell? When he heard it, he said, Ishita, I will not be able to, thanks Rohit, I will not be able to, dedicate a smell to the domestic workers because it's complex, it's everyday. It will not be the finer things of life. So how do I encapsulate that in a perfumery bottle? So from this, so I want like smell object mostly to kind of think through how people associate certain objects with certain smells. But I'm also aware that people often use it in a very symbolic way. But at times the workers are using it in a sort of a material manifestations. But thank you for that question.
I was thinking as you're describing it that that it's almost like I was trying to work through what you're meaning, and I was wondering if maybe it's thinking about maybe not, almost like a defensive mechanism to name, right, and to think not about describing a phenomena, which would be what we think about as a smell, as kind of this phenomenological like thing, this thing happening, but rather to want to kind of name as a way of also somehow sort of avoiding characterization in this case, and avoiding the overly subjective sort of characterization or the emotional characterization, and being able to kind of like reify into a thing. Perhaps I'm just musing.
Yes, yes, yeah. Sorry, I don't want to take time, but it could be a reification. In the case of the perfumer, clearly there's a reification, but I'm still not able to work through. I'm still that's why I need to do a little bit more interviews, particularly with the female cab drivers. That why is it when they're talking about smells, they're also giving me corresponding objects, whatever, from where that smell emanates, what it is, this propensity to direct my attention to the objects. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, regarding the expression this olfactory displacement, this is an expression coined by an anthropologist, Deborah Jackson, and I think that it well describes all the context I presented. So the idea to have an olfactory landscape populated by polluted particles, that creating like a distancing with any relationship that we have with air, with earth. And in particular, the expression olfactory displacement is connected to the cancellation of indigenous olfactory rituals. Because in the past, and I think until 18th centuries, there was a strict relationship with the sense of smell. We can also think about the first public museum in 15th or 17th century, where that are not open to the public, but they are open only for a few people. The visitors can smell the artwork, for example. So there is this kind of relationship with object and with everything that we have that surround us. And I'm interested in this expression because I was investigating on this complexity, of olfactory landscape, in particular on this what I called non-olfactory places, that are the commercial mall, for example, the museum spaces, the aeroportual area, where there is no more the bacterial charge of the people, because everything is disinfected and is neglected. And is neglected in the idea of the eternal body. I put it in the title, no, because it's kind of cancellation and rejecting I can say in a post-human direction, where the vulnerability of body was something denied, and is something that is not reachable, because the body wants to be eternal in a cancellation of the human senses. But I think that the sense of smell is also at the center of some, for example, industry. For example, Google is creating an application to give us the possibility to smell, for example, the pyramids, the Egyptian pyramids. So there will be a kind of device attached to our PC, our computer, that can create the smell of pyramids, that can create the smell of Pantheon, of the ancient places, no? So is a kind of displacement, of olfactory displacement, because we don't have a direct contact with air, earth, and the object that surround us, but we have a relationship with smell towards the toxic compounds, and at the same time we are trying with application or new products of the tech industry to reproduce the sense of smell and to simulate the sense of smell, but in an artificial and virtual way. Okay?
Yeah, no. This was, yeah, I was just looking to have you guys both expand on that. Thank you. Thanks for the link too.
Is there anybody else that wants to ask something?
Could I ask Rohit? I don't see him anymore. Are you there, Rohit?
Yes, I'm very much here.
Okay. Very beautiful and also useful. You ended the presentation opening up new scenarios in which science could really help the question of pollution or whatever. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Just at the very end, you said, you know,
Yes.
instead of using this kind of scientific, quite strictly scientific approach, we could also go somewhere else. But then you did not articulate that opening. So can you tell us
Maybe
something
just
more?
in very brief, one of the criticisms, so the starting point is that one of the criticisms of one of the critiques in science studies or social studies of science is the sort of overarching scientization, as it's called, of the debate. So aspects of visibility or smell, but senses in general are not assigned validity in terms of when we talk about different knowledges. That being the starting point or the entry point, our argument is that there are also multiple sciences and not each has the same influence in the debate either. And so that's when we try to parse out the different sort of sciences of air pollution. And we found that there are these two ways in which they are bifurcating. So one of those is this emphasis on monitoring, in knowing the concentration. So ambient air pollution, what exists out there. And so that's where you have all this investment, multiple collaborations, publications. 9 out of 10 publications are from this arena related to air pollution, which is purely monitoring and then parsing it out. So these are, so for instance, volatile organic compounds, which are basically in all the perfumes as well. And all the kinds of indoor and outdoor, indoor commodities. There are supposed to be thousands of constituents or elements within it, but I was told by a leading scientist, we know only about 600 of them. So then there is this scramble to know more. We need to get to 700, 800, 900. And so that kind of science it gets disproportionate resources, investments, time, and also is very visible. So every other day there is a publication which gets newspaper coverage and news coverage and so on and so forth. So our point was that one of the things that this kind of science does is because it looks for standardization, it looks for comparisons. You can easily then compare Beijing and Delhi. You can compare Pittsburgh and Delhi, right? Or Paris and London, because you are abstracting out of context.
Yeah.
But there is also other sciences which are more painstaking, which take time, which take labor, and which need connections with people, and which look at where people are. And long-term health studies are that kind of science. Now, if you construct the problem as one of urgency, one that needs action right now, then obviously you're not going to, there is less value placed on a 20-year, 10-year collaborative study, which takes effort to mount and takes resources and obviously time. And there is even much less emphasis on the kind of environmental humanities that also is required here in this space. So our point has been to give it a little bit of a pause, to zoom out a step out of this compressed time and to think about the slow disaster, or think about air pollution not always as this urgent thing, but also as a condition we live with. Because, even if we were, and this is a point made by one scientist in Delhi, in the Delhi Pollution Control Authority, and he said, look, even if we do all the things that we are supposed to, the fact is that our geography also means that we will never be able to produce quote unquote standardized good air, even if we do all these things very well. Because it's just a fact that we have what are known as anticyclones in the winters. That is, there is no wind. Everything that we do here just gets trapped. And you cannot ask the poor to not heat themselves by burning things. In many places, you don't have municipal waste mechanism. So people just burn the garbage. What else are you going to do there? They're not going to live with piled up garbage that takes land around where you live. So in these situations, even if we do everything, we still, so you have to have other ways of thinking about it, rather than a compressed urgency that we want zero pollution or 20. We have to think about long-term, what kind of air can we live with? And what kind of air can we live with all these other compulsions that we do have? So for instance, electricity or energy, there was this, actually, let's not get into that. But the point is that, because that's a long story, but the recent Glasgow COP, the COP26, there was a big standoff between India, China, and the rest, because around coal, essentially. And there was push to basically end coal by a certain time-bound deadline. But India and China sort of then said, no, not phasing out, but phasing down. And, that is a reality. You have, there's energy requirements and electricity, power requirements, and so on. So, sometimes these arguments are made to sort of also give an easy way out to industry, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just make an argument for taking a breather, thinking through relationships, and slightly slowing down the process a little bit.
Thank you very much. And maybe, I don't know if there are other questions, but especially with your stress on the idea that the problem is actually questioning also the notion of science somehow. And I was also thinking, and I'm addressing Elena now, in terms of, the project is beautiful, it's very important, is something essential for whatever comes out of the historical moment, whatever. But I was thinking, how do you imagine the outcome of the whole project, especially if you think, now I was listening to I can't remember her name, I'm sorry, Ishita Dey, the notion that writing or speaking does not get to the smell. No, there is a kind of problem there in terms of how do we conceptualize the outcome of a project where the object is somehow elusive. No, so I was imagining, how do you consider the outcome, whatever it is, and I would like to know what you have in mind, also in terms of it can be the women referring to objects in order to give a sense of the smell, but still the smell is unconveyable somehow in terms of academic writing or academic dialogue or whatever. How do you consider this, either in terms of a problem, either in terms of a possibility of doing some sort of, maybe art is also important in this project? Well, of course it is important, but also along this notion that you can't really describe the smell.
Okay, thanks for the question. Really, I'm working on different output with other researcher and historical professor. One of the first output I have in mind now is to educate. So different workshop to create like an olfactory training. Also, I'm working now at the secondary school, for example, and we are creating olfactory workshop with the students to give them the possibility to explore and to extend the perception of smell and also the distribution of smell, good smell, bad smell, to overcome this binary distinction in a colonial way and in the environmental perspective. This is one of the first outcome. Another outcome is working with an architect that is creating different applications that give the possibility to study how we can purify the air. And purification of the air is so complex, as well as the toxicity of air, because we arrive to think about the air purifiers in India, for example, and Rohit Negi well described it. But then remained the problem of the purification that is something pertaining in a discrimination way of society. So the rich people that can allow the purifiers and the poor people that are not allowed it. And then also to overcome the problem of the artificial perfume industry. I'm as well in contact and working with Christopher Fickenshire. He is part also of the project as a partner at the Jardín Botánico de Bahia. He is trying to create a perfume directed from plants in the Jardín de Bahia. So the idea is also to think about how we can renovate the sense of perfume and the industry of perfume in an idea that is no more artificial. Then, yeah, I have different other outcomes, but yeah, maybe we can speak later because it's.
I knew, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, then.
Thanks.
I think that we reached the end of today's event. On behalf of the Center and the Technoculture Research Unit, I would like to thank all the speakers today for giving us this new way of looking, and even our language. Is kind of bears the witness to this hierarchy of the senses of listening and not smelling. Unfortunately, this research, we are definitely coming out of this much enriched. So thank you for being with us this afternoon, and thank you Elena for putting this together, and best of luck with the project. Elena actually is in Naples, so we could have organized something at the university, which means we would have worn masks.
Yeah.
So I don't know maybe how it would have worked out.
Really, thanks to everybody for accepting my invitation and my proposal.
Thank you
very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao. Ok, questo è il fatto sicuramente più interessante di...
No, poi mi ha scritto Cecilia, ha detto che è chiuso.